Hi everyone, today we are going to learn how to use a while loop. Okay? So, a while loop is used to make sure user enter valid data. Okay? Again, while loop is used to make sure users enter valid data. Okay? Now, by the end of this lesson, okay, you will be able to understand what the while loop does. Okay, it's very important. Then also you will be able to use it for data validation. And last but not least, you will be able to trace through code step by step to prove that it works. Okay, so that's our target for today. Okay, at the end of this lesson. Now, if you still remember a few meetings back, we discussed the following control structures, as you can see on the screen. Now, we discussed sequential control structure and also selection. And then today we're going to discuss the third one, which is called repetition. That is also known as looping. And one of the loops that we can use is while loop beside the for loop. Okay? Next meeting we are going to discuss for loop, but today we are going to discuss while loop. Okay? So to make this lesson easier for you to understand, let's use a real world analogy. Okay? By giving analogies, everything makes sense. Everything is understood very simply, very clearly, okay, very easily. Okay? Now imagine, as you can see on our screen, there's a school there, okay, and at the door, at the gate, there's a guard. Okay, the job of that person is to check if the ID number of the students who want to enter the building is valid or invalid. Okay, so that's our analogy. Imagine you're going to enter a building. Okay, so how can you enter the building? Okay, now, as you can see, the guard checks, right? Validates the ID number of a student, of every student who wants to go inside the building. Now, the guard at the door would say, you can only enter if your ID number is between 0 and 100. Okay? So if the ID number of a student is in between 0 and 100, then the student can enter. Now, the student would say, my ID number is 150. Okay? So obviously, apparently, 150 is invalid because it is not in between 0 and 100. So what would the guard say? Well, the guard would say, you are not allowed to enter the building. Because your ID number is 150. So apparently you are not allowed to enter. Okay, so another try. Okay, the student would say, -10, that's my ID number. My ID number is -10, but logically, -10 is not in between 0 and 100. So what would the guard would say? The guard would say, you are not allowed to enter because your ID number is invalid. Okay, it's -10. So obviously it's not in between 0 and 100. Okay, another try. The student would say, my ID number is 85. Whoa. Obviously, 85 is a valid ID number because it's in between 0 and 100. So the guard would say, welcome, you can now enter the building. Oh, did you get that analogy? So it keeps on, the student keeps on giving ID number again and again, because the value, the ID number that the student has been given to the guard was invalid. So by the time the student gave, the valid ID number, that was the time that he could enter the building. Okay? So, the guard keeps asking, right? So, that's the loop. Yeah? As long as the user gives, or the student gives invalid number, the guard keeps asking, give me a number, give me an ID number that is in between 0 and 100. Okay, so that's exactly how a while loop works. Did you get the analogy? It's very easy, right? Okay. Any questions so far? Do you have any questions? No? Okay, very good. Very impressive. Okay, now, what are the keywords here? What do these three represent here? Okay, guard, condition, and repeating question. Now, what does guard represent? The guard represents the while loop, okay? Because the guard keeps asking, keeps validating the ID number being given by the student. Okay, so the guard is the while loop. Okay? Now, what does condition represent here? The condition represents the valid range, which is in between 0 and 100. Okay? Now, what does repeating question represent here? The repeating question represents the loop repeats, or the loop execution. Okay, so these are the three keywords here. Okay? Are there any questions so far? Everything is clear, I hope. Okay, now it's time to know more about while loop by learning the concepts. Okay? Now, a while loop, remember, okay, always remember that a while loop repeats a block of code, meaning the body of the loop that is being repeated, okay, using while loop, as long as the condition is true. So as long as the condition is true, loop goes on and on. Loop is being repeated. Okay? The condition is in this case, is between the valid range, which is in between 0 and 100. Okay? So that is the concepts. The while loop repeats a block of code, and that block of code is being repeated as long as the condition is true. Okay? Remember that. Do not forget that. Okay, now it's time to practice our logical thinking skills by doing the coding. Okay? This code is written in Python. And Python is one of the most popular programming languages nowadays, okay? Because of its simplicity. Okay, it's very simple. It's very short compared to Java. Okay, so let's use Python in class. Okay, now as you can see here, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines of code. As you can see, I hope it's clear. I hope it's visible here. Okay, there you go. So the first line in our code is the user inputs. Okay, the user enters a number. The user enters a score. The user enters a test score. Okay, Now, the second line is the while loop with condition, while condition. Okay, so condition is there are two conditions actually. So the first condition is score is less than 0, and the other one is score is greater than 100. Okay, now the body of the loop has two lines. Okay, the first line is the error message, invalid input, please enter a number between 0 and 100. So if the user enters an invalid score, so that error message is displayed. Okay, and then the second line in the body of the loop is another user input. Now let's go back to the first line. Okay, the user input. So the user input is entered, the score is entered by the user, and whatever value the user enters, it goes straight to the variable score. So as you can see, the score variable is here. So whatever the input of the user is, it goes straight to score. Okay, and then that score is being validated using our conditions. Okay, the score that is entered by the user is validated using the while loop. Okay, if one of the two conditions turns true, therefore the error message is being printed on screen, and the user is asked to input another score. So those two lines are executed if one or two conditions turn true. Now, if one or both conditions turn false, then the body of the loop will not be executed anymore. So the last line will be executed, okay, which is another printing statement, which is the printing of the score. So that's how this while loop works. Okay, that's how that very simple program in Python works. So user, again, recap, the user enters a score, and that entered score is assigned or saved or stored in a variable called score. Okay? And that score that is entered by the user is evaluated or validated using a while loop. Okay? If one or both conditions turn true, then it goes inside the loop and execute the body of the loop. Okay? If one or two conditions turn false, then it gets out of the loop stops, and execute the remaining of the code, which is the printing of the score. So that's how the simple code in Python works. Okay? Are there any questions? Okay? Everything is clear? Okay, let's move on then. Now, again, there's another way for you to understand the code, to understand the concept of while, and that is by doing the walkthrough, okay? By tracing, by simulating the code, okay? Again, to prove that the logic works and handles out of bounds inputs correctly, then this is very helpful. Okay? Let's start. Now I have here a table, and then this table has 5 columns, as you can see. Attempt, input score, condition, loop runs, and output message. Okay, now let's have the first attempt. Let's have the first input, and then the first input is 150. Okay? Now, the input is going to be validated here. It's going to be evaluated using a while loop. Now there are two conditions. So if one of these two conditions turns true, then the loop continues, right? Now this 150, which is the score, less than 0, that's false. But there's another one to be validated. Is 150 greater than 100? It's true. So therefore, one of the two conditions turns true, then the condition turns true, right? Because we're using the logical operator OR. And again, if the condition turns true, what's going to happen with the loop? The loop goes on, right? The loop runs, true or false? Yes, it's going to run again. And if the loop runs again, then what would our output message be? Okay, our output message be invalid because the input was 150, and 150 apparently is not in between 0 and 100, right? So I hope this first input makes sense to you. I hope this makes sense to everybody. Any questions so far? No questions? Okay, very good. Let's move on. Let's have another attempt. Let's have another input. Okay? The second input is -5. So in our head, it's obvious that -5 is not in between 0 and 100. Well, let's use our conditions here, our while conditions. So again, our input is -5. So let's have the first condition here. Is -5 less than 0? It is, right? So it's true. So again, our condition here is true because one of the two conditions turns true. So our condition column displays true. Okay? Now let's have the fourth column, the loop runs. So again, the condition turns true, so the loop goes on. The loop continues. So the loop runs column would display yes, because the condition turns true, right? Then if the condition turns true, the loop goes on, the loop continues, then our output message would be invalid. Okay? Because the user must input another value, another score, because the score that was entered previously was invalid. Okay, so it has to be, the message must be invalid. Okay, now let's have another try, let's have another attempt, let's have another input. Okay, now the third input is 75. So apparently 75 is in between 0 and 100, right? And that input must be evaluated using our two conditions. So the first condition is, again, our score is 75, so it's 75 less than 0. That's not true, so it's false. 75, the second condition, 75 greater than 100, again, it's false. So none of the two conditions turns true. So it's false. So this column, this condition columns display false. Again, if the condition turns false, what happens to the loop? The loop stops. Okay, it won't run again. So the loop runs column will display no. Okay, the loop runs column displays no, because the loop stops. Why does it stop? Because our conditions turn false. Okay? Then last but not least, the last column, the output message, since the input was 75, which is in between 0 and 100, so output message column displays valid score. Okay? And since the input was valid, so it gets out of the loop and to terminate the loop, to stop the loop. Okay? So that's how to simulate, that's how to trace, that's how to do the walkthrough. Okay? So by doing the walkthrough, we can understand, we can determine which one is wrong, which one is not wrong, which one is right. We can see the whole thing. Okay? The logic. We can understand the code. We can understand the logic. Okay? Any questions? Are there any questions so far? No questions still? Okay, very good guys. Keep it up. Impressive. Okay, let's move on then. Now again, remember, the loop only stops when the condition becomes false. But while the condition is true, the loop continues. The loop goes on and on and on. Okay? So the only time the loop stops is when the condition becomes false. Okay? Remember that. Do not forget that. Okay. Now I think we have reached, we have satisfied our goals for today. And it's time to, before we say goodbye, let's recap. Okay, let's summarize. So, today we learned while loops repeat code based on a condition. Okay, the loop continues as long as the condition turns true. If the condition turns false, then the loop stops. Okay? Remember that. Now another thing that we learned today is loops are useful for data validation. It's very important to validate, okay? To make sure that inputs are valid. We have to validate inputs, okay? You cannot afford to make mistakes. And then also today we learn always loop while the input is invalid, okay? While the input is invalid, the loop goes on and on and on and on. Okay, the loop continues. Then another thing that we learned today is we used a trace table to prove that our logic works. Okay? Our logic, our code written in Python works correctly. Okay, so that's it for today, guys. I hope you learned something, you understood everything we had today. Okay, remember, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to ask. Okay, it's very important you understand the lessons in class. Okay, see you again next meeting. Bye-bye.